"Rancher, why is the rattlesnake between your legs small? It won't fit," shouted the mail-order bride. The rattlesnake was small, too small to be the threat-making giant mail-order bride Elena panic on her wedding night. "It won't fit," she shouted at Thomas McKenna, her 6'1" frame blocking his drunken lunge at the creature between his legs. Elena had fled Boston's cruelty, where her height marked her as unnatural, believing she'd found acceptance through tender letters. However, Thomas grabbed her throat. "Giant freak, mocking me already?" But his fingers couldn't span her powerful neck, and when Sam Cartwright exploded through the door, Elena saw everything. Sam, barely reaching her shoulder, looking up at her like she was the sunrise, had written those letters about dreaming of a woman he could look up to, literally and figuratively. The small rattlesnake escaped through the floorboards, but Elena remained trapped. She'd married the wrong man, while the right one stood guard, worshipping her from afar. The cabin smelled of whiskey and fear. Thomas's grip tightened on Elena's throat, but she didn't flinch. Years of being called circus freak in Boston had taught her to stand tall, even when the world wanted her to shrink. But Sam's voice cut through the violence like a prayer. "Let her go, Tom. Now." Sam stood in the doorway, all 5'6" of him, vibrating with a fury that made him seem larger than any man Elena had ever seen. His weathered hands, the ones that had written about wanting to worship every inch of a strong woman, clenched into fists. Thomas laughed, ugly and wet. "What you gonna do, runt? Fight me for my property?" That word, property, made Elena's grandmother's stories flood back. Stories of chains and auction blocks, of women sold like cattle. She'd sworn she'd never be owned. Yet here she stood, in a wedding dress that felt like shackles, married to the wrong man, because she'd fallen in love with the right man's words. "I said those things in the letters." Sam's voice broke. "About loving a woman who could lift feed sacks easier than most men. About finding beauty and strength. About wanting someone I could look up to in every way." His grey eyes met Elena's, and she saw years of loneliness there. "I wrote what was in my heart, thinking it was for Tom. But I was writing to you. I just didn't know it yet." Thomas released Elena's throat to swing at Sam, but whiskey made him slow. Sam ducked, then did something that changed everything. Instead of fighting back, he walked past Thomas like he wasn't there and stood before Elena. He had to crane his neck to meet her eyes. "You're not property," he said softly. "You're a sunrise. You're a mountain. You're everything those Boston fools were too small to appreciate." Elena's tears came then, hot and sudden. No one had ever looked at her like this, not despite her height, but because of it. Sam reached up, his fingertips barely grazing her cheek, and she had to bend down to feel his touch fully. The gesture was so tender, so reverent, that Thomas's drunken cursing faded to nothing. "The marriage ain't valid," Sam continued, his voice stronger now. "Tom's already married. Got a wife in Sacramento he never divorced. I found the papers last week, was gonna tell you, but—" Thomas lunged again, but this time Elena caught his wrist. Her dockworker strength, the muscles that Boston ladies had whispered about in horror, held him like iron. "You lied?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Course I lied." Thomas spat. "Needed someone to work the ranch, and who else would want a giant freak like—" He never finished. Elena lifted him, actually lifted him off his feet with one hand, and set him outside the cabin door. Then she closed it, turned the lock, and faced Sam. They stood there, the giant woman and the small man, while outside Thomas raged and pounded. But inside, in the golden lamplight, something sacred was happening. Sam pulled a folded paper from his pocket, worn soft from handling. "Your first letter," he whispered. "Where you wrote about being too tall for church pews, too strong for dancing partners. Where you said you felt like God made you wrong." His voice caught. "I wanted to write back that God made you exactly right. That somewhere, someone was praying for exactly you. You were praying for me?" Elena sank to her knees, and even kneeling, she was nearly eye level with him. "Every night," Sam admitted. "Even before I knew you existed. I prayed for a woman who wouldn't break. Someone I could worship without worrying I'd hurt her." He touched her face again, wonder in his eyes. Then you wrote back, and I knew God had been listening. The pounding stopped. Through the window, they saw Thomas stumbling toward the barn, probably to sleep it off. But Elena didn't care about Thomas anymore. She cared about the man in front of her, the one whose soul had called to hers across thousands of miles. The letters, she said. Tell me they were real. Tell me those feelings were yours. Sam knelt too, meeting her at her level. Every word, every dream, every promise. I just never dreamed I'd have the right to say them to your face. Say them now, Elena whispered. And he did. He told her about watching her step off the stagecoach that morning, how seeing her tower over everyone made his heart stop because she was exactly what he'd imagined. He told her about the torture of watching Thomas claim her. He told her about standing outside their cabin, ready to kill his employer if he heard her cry out in pain. I'm not your husband, Sam finished. But I promise you this, I'll protect you until you can get back to Boston, until you're free. Elena laughed then, surprising them both. Boston? Sam, I burned every bridge to Boston. Sold everything. I came here to find the man who wrote those letters. She cupped his weathered face in her massive hands. I came here to find you. I just didn't know your name. The morning came like a held breath finally released. Elena woke on the floor by the dying fire, Sam's coat covering her like a promise. He sat against the door, his small frame a guardian between her and whatever Thomas might do. He hadn't slept. She could tell by the way his shoulders carried the whole night's weight. You stayed, she whispered. Always will, he answered without turning. If you'll let me. Outside, the ranch was waking up wrong. No rooster crow, no cattle sounds. Elena stood, her full height casting shadows, and looked through the window. The animals were gone. Every last head of cattle vanished in the night. Thomas, Sam said quietly. He took them to Luther Crenshaw's place. Probably sold them for drinking money and a ticket out of town. He finally turned to face her, and Elena saw the devastation there. This ranch is all I have, Elena. I worked 7 years for Tom's father, saved every penny. Tom inherited the land, but I bought the cattle. They were mine, and now we get them back, Elena said simply. Sam laughed, bitter as coffee grounds. How? Luther Crenshaw owns the sheriff, owns the judge, owns half the territory, but he doesn't own me. The way she said it made Sam really look at her. Not the gentle giant who'd cried in his arms last night, but the woman who'd survived Boston's cruelty. The woman who'd worked the docks alongside Irish bruisers who'd wanted her gone. The woman who'd been forged in fires he was only beginning to understand. Elena, you don't understand. Luther's dangerous. His men haven't met me. She found her traveling trunk, the one that held her old life. But instead of the expected dresses, Sam watched her pull out work clothes. Men's clothes, altered to fit her powerful frame. The clothes of someone who'd learned to fight for every inch of space she took up in the world. In Boston, she said, changing without shame. What was the point of modesty when you'd never been allowed dignity? They tried to run me off the docks. Said no woman should be that strong. Said I was an abomination. She pulled on the pants, the thick shirt. Know what I did? Sam shook his head, mesmerized. I organized the other outcasts. The Irish too poor to matter. The Chinese they pretended didn't exist. The freed slaves with nowhere else to go. We formed our own union. She smiled, and it was sharp as winter. The dock bosses learned real quick that when you push the unwanted together, they become unstoppable. This isn't Boston. This is Montana. Men kill over cattle here. Elena knelt before him again, taking his weathered hands. Sam, those letters you wrote. You said you wanted a partner. Someone to stand beside, not behind. Did you mean it? With my whole heart. Then let me stand. They rode out an hour later, but not toward Luther Crenshaw's ranch. Elena turned her horse, barely containing her weight but managing, toward town. Toward the church, where the other women would be gathering for morning prayer circle. What are you doing? Sam asked, confused. What I learned in Boston. The powerful only stay powerful when the powerless stay divided. The church was full of women. Ranchers' wives, shopkeepers' daughters, even the sporting ladies from the saloon, who snuck in the back. They all stopped when Elena entered, having to duck through the doorframe. Some had laughed at the giant mail-order bride yesterday. None were laughing now. "My name is Elena," she said, her voice filling the space. "Yesterday I married Thomas McKenna. Last night I discovered the marriage was a lie. He's already married. This morning he stole everything and ran." She let that sink in. "How many of you have been lied to, cheated, had your work stolen by men who think we're property?" The silence stretched like taffy. Then Margaret Shaw, the minister's wife, stood. "Luther Crenshaw foreclosed on our farm when my husband was sick. Said I couldn't possibly run it myself, being just a woman." Another stood. Then another. Stories poured out like water through a broken dam. Luther Crenshaw's name came up again and again. The pattern was clear. He preyed on the vulnerable, especially women. "In Boston," Elena continued, "I learned that one giant woman is a freak. But 20 women together? That's a revolution." Old Widow Patterson laughed. "Child, what exactly are you proposing?" "Luther has a ranch full of stolen cattle, more than his men can handle. What if those cattle just wandered home? What if every fence on his property mysteriously fell down? What if his wells ran dry?" Elena's smile was pure mischief. "What if the women he's been stepping on decided to step back?" The sporting ladies in the back started giggling. "His men spend every Saturday night at our establishment," one called out. "Be a shame if their drinks were a little stronger than usual this week," the minister's wife gasped, then grinned. "And I happen to know his cook just quit. He'll be looking for someone to prepare meals for 30 ranch hands." The conspiracy grew like wildfire. Every woman had a piece of Luther Crenshaw's world they could touch. The laundress who did his sheets, the seamstress who mended his men's clothes, the grocer's wife who ordered his supplies. Together they weren't victims. They were an army. Sam watched from the back, awe dawning on his face. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with through letters, not just strong in body, but in spirit. A natural leader who turned outcasts into allies. "Tonight," Elena said, "during the poker game Luther never misses, we take back what's ours. Not just my cattle. Everything he's stolen from every woman in this room. But the sheriff," someone started. "The sheriff's wife is sitting right here." Eleanor pointed to a small woman in the third row. "Aren't you Mrs. Clayton?" The woman stood, fury in her eyes. "Luther's been blackmailing my husband for years. Has proof he took bribes. But if Luther's empire falls apart, if he's got nothing left to threaten with, your husband goes free," Elena finished. "And we all get justice." The plan they hatched was brilliant in its simplicity. No violence, that was men's way. Instead, they would use Luther's assumptions against him. He'd never suspect the women, never think the giant mail-order bride who'd arrived yesterday could organize a rebellion by breakfast. As they prepared to leave, setting their plan in motion, Margaret Shaw touched Elena's arm. "That small man in the back, he loves you something fierce." Elena looked at Sam, who was trying to disappear into the shadows. "I know. Then why aren't you with him instead of fighting Luther?" "Because," Elena said softly, "Sam wrote that he wanted a partner. Someone equal. How can I be his equal if I don't fight for what's mine? How can I love him properly if I don't first prove I can stand on my own?" The older woman smiled. "You're going to change everything, aren't you? Not just for you, but for all of us. That's the plan." As they walked back to the horses, Sam caught her hand. His fingers barely wrapped around half of hers, but the grip was sure. "You're magnificent," he breathed. "I wrote about wanting a strong woman, but I never imagined this." "Disappointed?" Elena asked, suddenly vulnerable. Sam laughed, bright and true. "Eleanor, I'm in awe. I spent years thinking I was protecting you by staying guard at that door. But you don't need protection, do you? You need a witness, someone to see you become who you really are." She bent down and kissed him then, right there in the street where everyone could see. The giant woman and the small man claiming each other in daylight. Some folks gasped, others whispered, but Elena didn't care. She'd been hiding her whole life, her strength, her height, her heart. No more. "After tonight," she said against his lips, "after we get back what's ours, after Luther learns what happens when you underestimate women, will you marry me? For real this time?" Sam's eyes filled with tears. "Elena, I'm nobody. I've got nothing now that the cattle are gone. I can't provide." Samuel Cartwright, she interrupted. I didn't ask what you could provide. I asked if you'd marry me, if you'd stand beside me, not in front or behind, if you'd let me love you the way you taught me love should be, as equals. Yes, he whispered. Yes to all of it. Yes to whatever comes next. Just yes. By nightfall, Luther Crenshaw's ranch was surrounded by ghosts. That's what his men would say later, that ghostly figures moved through the darkness, that their guns wouldn't fire, that the very land turned against them. But Elena knew better. They weren't ghosts. They were women who'd learned to move in shadows because the light had never been safe for them. The sporting ladies had done their work perfectly. Every ranch hand who'd visited the saloon was sleeping deeper than the dead, their whiskey laced with enough laudanum to keep them dreaming until dawn. The few guards left standing were the mean ones, the ones even the working girls wouldn't touch. But Elena had a plan for them too. She stood at the ranch's edge, her massive frame hidden in Sam's black duster that barely reached her knees. Beside her, Margaret Shaw held a torch. Behind them, 37 women waited in silence, each nursing years of fury finally given shape. You sure about this? Sam whispered. He'd insisted on coming, though Eleanor had begged him to stay safe. Luther's killed men for less than what you're about to do. He's killed men, Elena corrected. Let's see how he handles women. She stepped into the light of Luther's front porch, her full height on display, no longer hunching or apologizing for the space she took. The guard at the door laughed, actually laughed at the sight of her. Well, the giant bride. Come to beg for your cattle back, or maybe offer a trade. His eyes traveled her body like she was livestock. Luther might be interested in something that big. Probably never had a woman he couldn't break. Elena smiled. Sweet as poison. I'm counting on it. She walked right up to him, and he had to crane his neck to maintain eye contact. His hand went to his gun, but Elena moved faster. Not with violence, but with something worse. She started crying. Huge, gasping sobs that shook her whole frame. Please, she wailed, loud enough to wake the dead. Please, I just want to talk to Mr. Crenshaw. My husband left me, took everything. I have nowhere else to go. The guard relaxed. A crying woman he understood. A desperate woman was no threat. Luther's in his study. But make it quick. Elena walked through that front door like she owned it, still sobbing dramatically. Behind her, she heard the soft thud of Margaret's rolling pin meeting the guard's skull. When down, Luther's study reeked of cigars and cruelty. He sat behind a massive desk counting money, her cattle money, she realized. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes lit with the particular greed of men who collect things that shouldn't be collected. The giant bride, he purred. Thomas said you were something special. Didn't mention you were magnificent. Elena let herself sway, playing broken. Mr. Crenshaw, Thomas sold you our cattle, but they weren't his to sell. I worked for them, saved for them, now they're mine. Luther stood, walked around the desk. He was tall for a normal man, but still had to look up at her. It clearly excited him. But maybe we can make a deal. A woman like you. Well, there's a certain value to the unusual. His hand reached for her waist, and Elena let him touch her. Let him think she was conquered. Behind him through the window she saw the women moving, fences falling, cattle being quietly led away. The sheriff's wife, Mrs. Clayton, pouring kerosene around the barn full of stolen goods, not to burn it, but to make Luther think twice about stopping them. You're trembling, Luther said, mistaking her contained rage for fear. I've never met a man who wasn't afraid of me, Elena whispered, which was true. I'm not afraid of anything, Luther boasted, which was his mistake. Elena grabbed his wrist, her dockworker's strength crushing bone. Luther screamed, but she covered his mouth with her other hand, lifting him off his feet like he weighed nothing. You should be afraid, she said quietly. You should be terrified. Because I'm not just one giant woman. I'm every woman you've ever stepped on, stolen from, destroyed. We're all here tonight, taking back what's ours. Through the window, Luther saw his empire crumbling. Women everywhere, leading horses, driving cattle, carrying out supplies from his storehouse. His ranch hands nowhere to be seen. His guards mysteriously absent. The sheriff, He gasped when she let him breathe. "Is on his way," Elena agreed. "His wife sent him a very interesting telegram about the documents you've been using to blackmail him. Documents that are currently burning in your fireplace." She smiled as his face went white. "Did you really think we couldn't read? Couldn't plan? Couldn't fight back?" She dropped him, then let him crumple to the floor, but she wasn't done. From her pocket she pulled out a document, one Sam had helped her prepare. "Sign it," she ordered. "What is it?" "A bill of sale, returning every head of cattle to their rightful owners, every foreclosed property you stole through fraud, every business you destroyed through intimidation. I'll never—" Elena lifted him again, held him against the wall with one hand. "Sign it, or I'll tell everyone what really happened to your first wife. Margaret Shaw's cousin, wasn't she? The one who fell down the well?" Luther went grey. That was the thing about women's gossip. Men never paid attention to it. Never realized that women knew everything, remembered everything, whispered truths in kitchens and over washing lines, until every secret was common knowledge among those deemed too unimportant to matter. He signed. The sheriff arrived just as the women were leaving, driving the last of the cattle home. Sheriff Clayton took one look at his wife, standing proud among the rebels, and made his choice. "Looks like you've been robbed, Luther," he said mildly. "Shame you can't remember who did it. Must have been that knock to the head. You can't do this," Luther screamed. "They're just women. That giant freak and her—" Sam's fist connected with Luther's jaw, small but precise. The bigger man dropped like a stone. "That's my future wife you're talking about," Sam said quietly. Then louder, "The one who just freed this whole town from your boot." Elena looked at Sam, her gentle warrior, defending her honor with his small, perfect fists. She'd never loved him more. "It's over," Sheriff Clayton announced. "Luther, you're under arrest for fraud, blackmail, and suspicion of murder. Ladies," he tipped his hat to the assembled women, "I suggest you all get home. Been a long night, but the women didn't scatter like they were supposed to. They stood together, surrounding Elena, their giant leader, who'd shown them they didn't have to be small. "This isn't over," Margaret Shaw announced. "This is just the beginning. We've seen what we can do together. The town council elections are next month," the banker's wife added. "Shame there's no law saying women can't run yet," someone muttered. And they all laughed. Elena felt their power, their unity, their newfound strength, and knew she'd done something bigger than getting back some cattle. She'd lit a fire that would burn through the whole territory, but right now all she wanted was Sam. She found him by the horses, checking the saddles like the caretaker he was. When he saw her coming, his whole face lit up like sunrise. "You did it," he breathed. "We did it," she corrected, then dropped to her knees in front of him right there in the dirt. "Sam, I need to tell you something." "Eleanor, you don't have to—" "I love you," she said simply. "Not because you wrote beautiful letters, not because you see me as more than my size. I love you because when I was crying last night, you didn't try to fix me. You just witnessed me. Because when I said I needed to fight, you didn't try to protect me. You stood beside me. Because you're the strongest man I've ever met. And it has nothing to do with your body." Sam was crying now, touching her face with those weathered hands that had written poetry just for her. "I love you because you're impossible," he said. "Because you shouldn't exist, a woman that powerful, that gentle, that brilliant. But you do exist, and somehow, miraculously, you're choosing me." "Choose you?" "Sam, I'd fight 100 Luther Crenshaws for you. I'd tear down the whole world and rebuild it just to see you smile. You basically just did." They laughed. And then they were kissing, the giant woman and the small man, while the stars watched and the cattle lowed and the women of the town headed home victorious. But in the darkness beyond the ranch, Thomas McKenna watched. He hadn't left town after all. He'd been hiding, waiting, planning. And now, seeing Elena kissing his ranch hand, seeing his empire given away to women, something black and violent rose in his chest. He'd make them pay. The giant woman who'd humiliated him, the small man who'd stolen what was rightfully his. Tomorrow, at the wedding Sam and Elena were already planning, everyone in town was talking about it. Thomas would have his revenge. He touched the gun at his hip and smiled. They thought they'd won. But Thomas had one more card to play, and this time he wouldn't miss. The wedding dress didn't fit. Of course it didn't. Nothing ever fit Elena, but this morning, standing in Margaret Shaw's kitchen while 7 women tried to alter white fabric around her powerful frame, she didn't care. She was marrying Sam at sunset. Sam, who'd spent the night sleeping on the church steps to make sure everything was proper. Sam, who'd written her one last letter delivered this morning. "My giant love," it read. "Today I become the richest man in Montana. Not because of cattle or land, but because I get to love you out loud, in daylight, before God and everyone." Elena pressed the letter to her heart while the women worked. Outside, the whole town was preparing. Tables made from barn doors, wildflowers picked by children who'd never seen the giant bride smile until yesterday. Even Luther's former ranch hands, freed from his tyranny, were setting up chairs. Nobody saw Thomas McKenna slip into the church. Nobody saw him climb to the bell tower with his rifle. Nobody knew he'd been drinking since dawn, stoking his rage into something monstrous. Sam stood at the altar in his father's suit, the one he'd saved for 7 years for a special occasion that he'd never believed would come. The minister kept asking if he wanted a box to stand on, and Sam kept refusing. "I want to look up at her," he said simply. "I want everyone to see that I'm not ashamed of loving someone bigger than me. I want them to know that her size doesn't diminish me. It elevates us both." The church doors opened, and Elena appeared. The women had given up on making the dress fit properly. Instead, they'd turned it into something new, part wedding dress, part warrior's robe. It showed her arms, her strength, her height. She looked like what she was, a giant who'd stopped trying to be small. The whole town gasped. Not in mockery, but in awe. Elena walked down that aisle alone. She'd given herself away too many times already. Her eyes never left Sam's face, that weathered, beautiful face that looked at her like she was a miracle. When she reached him, she didn't crouch or kneel. She stood at her full height, and Sam reached up to take her hands. "Before we start," Sam said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I need to say something. People are going to talk about us. The giant woman and the small man. They're going to say it's unnatural. They're going to laugh." He squeezed her hands. "Let them. Because they'll never know what it's like to love someone this brave. They'll never understand the view from down here, looking up at the sun." Elena was crying, but she was smiling too. "And they'll never understand the view from up here, looking down at the mountain that is your heart." The minister began the ceremony, but Thomas was moving in the bell tower, raising his rifle, finding his target. Not Elena, that would be too quick. He wanted her to suffer, so he aimed at Sam. Take away what she loved most, then let her live with it. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined, the minister began. The church door slammed open. Sheriff Clayton ran in, shouting, "Everyone down!" The shot rang out, but Elena had already moved. Something in her, instinct, love, the ancestry of survivors who'd learned to sense violence before it arrived, made her step in front of Sam. The bullet meant for his heart caught her shoulder instead, spinning her around. Blood spread across the white dress like spilled wine. Sam caught her as she fell, his small arms somehow strong enough to hold her. "Elena, no," but Elena wasn't done. Even bleeding, even shot, she was still the strongest person in that church. She pulled Sam down as the second shot shattered the window where he'd been standing. Then she stood, with a bullet in her shoulder and roared. It wasn't a scream. It was a war cry. The sound her grandmother had made when the slavers came. The sound her mother had made when they tried to take Elena away. The sound of women who'd been pushed too far. Thomas McKenna. She bellowed, her voice shaking the rafters. "You want me? Come get me." She strode out of that church, blood running down her arm, Sam trying to hold her back. Thomas was already climbing down from the bell tower, probably to run, but he hadn't counted on the women. They surrounded the church. Every woman from last night's rebellion, plus more. They'd heard the shot, seen their giant leader wounded, and something ancient and terrible woke in them. They didn't have weapons. They had something worse. They had rage. Thomas burst out of the church back door and ran straight into them. 30 women, 40, 50, all standing silent, all staring at him with eyes that promised violence. "Move!" he snarled, raising his gun. "Make us," Margaret Shaw said quietly. He aimed at her, but Elena's hand, her wounded arm's hand, caught the barrel. She'd walked through the crowd like Moses through the sea, and now she stood before him, terrible and beautiful, blood making her wedding dress look like battle armor. "You want to shoot me, Thomas? Then do it, but look me in the eyes when you do." Thomas tried, but he couldn't, because in Elena's eyes he saw himself reflected, small, petty, worthless. Not because of his size, but because of his soul. "You were never man enough for me," Elena said quietly. "Not because Sam's taller in spirit, though he is, but because you think strength means stepping on others. Sam knows strength means lifting others up." "I'll kill him," Thomas whispered. "If I can't have you." "I was never yours to have," Elena cut him off. "I belong to myself. I choose to share that self with Sam. And if you touch him, these women will tear you apart with their bare hands, and I'll help them." She wasn't bluffing. The women pressed closer, and Thomas saw his death in their eyes. He'd terrorized them separately, but together they were his judgment. He dropped the gun. Sheriff Clayton arrested him, and this time it would stick. Attempted murder in front of 50 witnesses. But Elena was already walking back to Sam, who stood in the church doorway, tears streaming down his face. "You got shot for me," he said, voice breaking. "I'd get shot 1,000 times for you," Elena replied, then swayed on her feet. Sam caught her, held her up, though she was nearly twice his weight. "We need the doctor. We need to finish our wedding," Elena corrected. "I'm not letting Thomas ruin this too." "Elena, you're bleeding. I've bled before." "I'll bleed again. But I only plan to marry you once." The doctor cleaned and bandaged her shoulder right there at the altar. The bullet had passed through cleanly, a scar to add to her collection, but nothing fatal. Elena stood through it all, Sam holding her good hand, neither of them willing to wait another moment. "Do you, Elena Esperanza Delgado Whitfield, take this man?" The minister began again. "Yes," Elena interrupted. "Whatever you're about to say, yes. I take him as my partner, my equal, my heart, my home. I take him in sickness and health, in bullets and peace, in giant and small, in everything. Yes," the minister turned to Sam. But he was already talking. "I take you, Elena. I take your strength and your softness, your rage and your tenderness. I take the privilege of loving you out loud. I take the honor of standing beside you, looking up at you, worshipping you exactly as you are. Yes to all of it. Yes to whatever comes. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you." They were already kissing. Elena had to bend down, Sam had to stretch up, and they met in the middle like they always would. The church erupted in celebration, but Elena heard none of it. All she heard was Sam's whisper against her lips, "My giant love, my perfect match." The reception was held right there, spilling out of the church into the street. Elena's shoulder throbbed, but she danced anyway, lifting Sam off his feet and spinning him around, while the town laughed and cheered. The women who'd fought beside her toasted her with whiskey, stolen from Luther's private collection. The men, humbled and a little afraid, offered respectful congratulations. As the sun set, painting the Montana sky purple and gold, Sam and Elena stood apart from the crowd. Her bandaged shoulder didn't stop her from pulling him close. "I thought I was coming here to hide," Elena said softly. "To find somewhere my size didn't matter. And instead I found somewhere my size was exactly what was needed. These women needed someone big enough to stand up first, to take the first hit, to show them they could fight back." She looked down at Sam, her eyes full of love. "And you needed someone you couldn't break, someone strong enough to hold all that love you've been saving up." "What did you need?" Sam asked. "Someone who could see me, not despite my size, not because of it, but complete with it. Someone who understood that being giant didn't make me less of a woman, just more of one." They kissed again as the stars came out. The giant woman and the small man who'd rewritten the rules of what love could look like. Years later, folks would tell the story different. They'd make Sam taller, Elena smaller, the love more conventional. But the women who were there, who fought that night, who watched Elena take a bullet and keep standing, they told it true. They told their daughters about the giant bride who refused to shrink, the small man whose heart was bigger than the sky, and the love that proved size was just a number. But the soul was infinite, and in their little ranch house, where the doorframes had been raised and the furniture built strong, Elena and Sam grew old together. She never got smaller, he never got taller, and their love never stopped being exactly perfect, exactly as it was. Giant and small and everything in between. When Elena finally passed, decades later, Sam had these words carved on her stone: "Here lies Elena Cartwright." She stood tall so others could too. And on his, when he joined her the very next winter, unable to live without his giant love. Here lies Sam Cartwright. He looked up and saw heaven. The rattlesnake between your legs might be small, might not fit, but love always finds a way